In the industrial heart of Ukraine stood Kharkov, the Soviet Union's fourth-largest city and a vital prize that would witness some of World War II's most brutal fighting. Between 1941 and 1943, this strategic metropolis changed hands 4 times, becoming a symbol of the savage struggle between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. The Battle of Kharkov was not a single engagement but a series of devastating confrontations that would shape the course of the Eastern Front. Each battle told a story of ambition, desperation, and the ultimate price of war. This ancient city, founded in 1654, would become the crucible where the fate of Hitler's eastern ambitions was ultimately decided. Kharkov's strategic importance lay in its position as a major industrial center and transportation hub. The city produced tanks, aircraft, and other military equipment vital to the Soviet war effort. Its railway networks connected Moscow to the Caucasus oil fields, making it a prize both sides desperately sought to control. Whoever held Kharkov controlled the industrial heartland of Ukraine. The first German capture of Kharkov came in October 1941 during the initial Nazi blitzkrieg across the Soviet Union. Wehrmacht forces, spearheaded by the 6th Army under General Friedrich Paulus, swept into the city as part of Operation Barbarossa's seemingly unstoppable advance. The city's capture marked another milestone in Hitler's dream of conquering the Soviet Union within a single campaign season. German forces encountered fierce resistance from Soviet defenders who understood the city's importance. The 21st Army, commanded by Lieutenant General Vasily Gordov, fought desperately to hold the city's approaches. Soviet tanks, many of them obsolete T-26 and BT-7 models, engaged German panzers in running battles across the Ukrainian steppes. Despite their courage, Soviet forces were overwhelmed by superior German tactics and equipment. For 18 months, Kharkov remained under brutal German occupation. The Nazi regime transformed the industrial center into a hub of exploitation and terror. Soviet citizens faced starvation, forced labor, and systematic murder. The city's large Jewish population suffered particularly under the Holocaust, with tens of thousands murdered in mass executions conducted by Einsatzgruppen and local collaborators. German occupation authorities, led by military commander General Karl Strecker, implemented harsh policies designed to extract maximum resources from the conquered territory. Factories were dismantled and shipped to Germany, while Ukrainian workers were conscripted for forced labor. The population, which had numbered over 800,000 before the war, shrank dramatically as people fled, were murdered, or died from starvation and disease. But the tide of war was turning. After the catastrophic defeat at Stalingrad in early 1943, the German army found itself increasingly on the defensive. Soviet forces, emboldened by their victory and growing stronger with each passing month, launched a series of offensives aimed at driving the invaders from Soviet soil. Stalin demanded immediate action to liberate Ukraine and prove that Stalingrad was not an isolated victory. The Second Battle of Kharkov began in February 1943 when Soviet forces launched Operation Star, a massive offensive designed to liberate Ukraine and push deep into German-held territory. Marshal Nikolai Vatutin commanded the Southwest Front, while General Vatutin and Popov led the Bryansk Front. Together, they deployed over 500,000 troops, 1,200 tanks, and 3,000 artillery pieces in what they believed would be a decisive blow against the weakened German forces. Soviet planning for Operation Star was ambitious but flawed. Stalin and his generals believed that German forces were demoralized and retreating after Stalingrad. Intelligence reports suggested that Army Group South was preparing to withdraw to the Dnieper River, leaving Kharkov and much of Ukraine undefended. This assessment would prove dangerously wrong. Initial Soviet advances were spectacular and seemed to confirm optimistic assessments. The Red Army smashed through German defensive lines, liberating vast territories and capturing thousands of prisoners. Soviet tank corps raced across the frozen Ukrainian steppes, their T-34 tanks seemingly unstoppable in the winter conditions. The 3rd Tank Army, commanded by Lieutenant General Pavel Rybalko, advanced over 200 kilometers in the first week of the offensive. Within days, Soviet forces had punched huge gaps in German lines. The 40th Army liberated Kursk, while the 69th Army captured Belgorod. Soviet cavalry units, supported by ski troops, exploited breakthroughs and spread panic among German rear area units. Radio Moscow announced that the Great Winter Offensive had begun and that German resistance was crumbling. The speed of the Soviet advance created dangerous gaps in their lines that would prove catastrophic. Supply columns struggled to keep pace with the rapidly advancing tank corps, leaving many units dangerously exposed and short of fuel, ammunition, and spare parts. Communications broke down as headquarters lost contact with forward elements scattered across hundreds of kilometers of front. German commanders, initially caught off guard by the ferocity of the attack, began to recognize opportunities for counterattack. Field Marshal Erich von Manstein, commanding Army Group South, was Germany's most skilled defensive tactician. Rather than attempt to hold every position, he developed a strategy of elastic defense, allowing Soviet forces to advance while preparing a devastating counterstrike. Manstein understood that overextended Soviet formations were vulnerable to a well-coordinated counteroffensive. He began secretly concentrating his reserves, including the elite SS Panzer Corps, for a massive counterblow. The German commander recognized that the Red Army's rapid advance had created the very conditions necessary for a classic pincer movement that could destroy entire Soviet armies. On February 16, 1943, Soviet forces recaptured Kharkov after fierce street fighting that lasted 3 days. The 40th Army, supported by elements of the 3rd Tank Army, fought through the city's industrial districts against determined German resistance. Soviet infantry cleared buildings room by room while tanks provided support against German strongpoints. The liberation was celebrated throughout the Soviet Union as proof that the Red Army could not only defend but also attack successfully. Stalin ordered massive celebrations, and Soviet propaganda proclaimed the beginning of Germany's final defeat. Newspapers published headlines declaring that the fascist beast was finally retreating and that victory was within sight. But the celebration was premature and would soon turn to catastrophe. Manstein had deliberately allowed Kharkov to fall, withdrawing his forces to prepared positions while Soviet units pushed deeper into what was becoming a carefully prepared trap. The SS Panzer Corps, including the elite Leibstandard, Das Reich and Totenkopf divisions, had been secretly repositioned for a massive counteroffensive. German preparations for the counteroffensive were meticulous and conducted under strict secrecy. The SS Panzer Corps, commanded by SS Oberfuhrer Paul Hauser, had been reinforced with the latest Tiger I tanks and assault guns. These units represented the cream of the German army, veterans of numerous campaigns who understood exactly how to exploit Soviet weaknesses. On February 20, 1943, Manstein launched Operation Counterstrike, later renamed Operation Gallop. German panzer divisions, spearheaded by the latest Tiger and Panther tanks, smashed into the overextended Soviet flanks with devastating effect. The attack achieved complete tactical surprise, catching Soviet commanders who believed German forces were in full retreat toward the Dnieper River. The German counteroffensive was devastating in its precision and brutality. The SS Panzer Corps advanced in 3 parallel columns, cutting through Soviet lines like a knife through butter. Soviet Tank Corps, isolated and running low on fuel and ammunition, found themselves surrounded and destroyed piecemeal. The 3rd Tank Army, which had spearheaded the initial Soviet advance, was virtually annihilated within 48 hours of fighting. Soviet forces retreated in chaos as discipline collapsed. German forces recaptured Kharkov by March 15 after brutal urban warfare. This became Hitler's last major Eastern Front victory, with Soviet casualties exceeding 270,000 while German losses totaled 48,000. The strategic consequences of the battle extended far beyond immediate military losses and would shape the remainder of the war. Hitler, emboldened by the victory at Kharkov, approved Operation Citadel, the massive German offensive at Kursk that would become Germany's last great gamble on the Eastern Front. Manstein's tactical brilliance had inadvertently encouraged Hitler's final strategic mistake. For the Soviet Union, the defeat at Kharkov provided harsh but valuable lessons that would improve their future performance. Stalin and his generals learned the dangers of overextension and the importance of maintaining reserves. The disaster led to significant reforms in Soviet military doctrine and command structure that would prove crucial in future battles. The battle also demonstrated the evolving nature of warfare on the Eastern Front and the importance of combined arms tactics. Tank warfare had become increasingly sophisticated, with both sides developing new tactics and technologies. German forces showed they could still achieve tactical victories, but their strategic position remained hopeless given Soviet industrial superiority. Individual acts of heroism emerged from the chaos of retreat and counterattack. Senior Lieutenant Fyodor Shiroky led his tank company in a desperate rearguard action, allowing thousands of Soviet soldiers to escape encirclement. Despite being outnumbered 10-1, his T-34s held their positions until ammunition was exhausted and the last tank was destroyed. The civilian population of Kharkov suffered tremendously during these battles, caught between advancing and retreating armies. Thousands of Ukrainian civilians died in the crossfire, while others faced starvation and disease as the city changed hands. The city's infrastructure was systematically destroyed, and those who survived faced an uncertain future under renewed German occupation. Soviet partisans operating behind German lines played a crucial role throughout the Kharkov campaigns, disrupting German supply lines and providing vital intelligence to Red Army headquarters. Groups led by commanders like Sitter Kovpak and Alexei Fedorov conducted sabotage operations against German installations, railway lines and communication networks. Their activities forced Germans to divert significant resources to rear area security, weakening frontline formations at critical moments. The partisan war in Ukraine was particularly brutal, with both sides committing atrocities against civilians suspected of collaboration. German reprisals against partisan activities were savage, often involving mass executions of entire villages. Soviet partisans responded with equal brutality, targeting not only German soldiers but also Ukrainian police and officials working with the occupation authorities. During the February 1943 offensive, partisan intelligence proved crucial in identifying weak points in German defenses. Radio operators hidden in forests and villages transmitted detailed reports about German troop movements, allowing Soviet commanders to concentrate their forces against the most vulnerable sectors. This intelligence network, built over months of careful preparation, gave the Red Army significant advantages in the initial phases of Operation Star. The role of logistics in determining the battle's outcome cannot be overstated. German forces, operating on increasingly stretched supply lines, struggled to maintain their equipment and replace losses. Soviet forces, despite their initial advantages, faced even greater logistical challenges as they advanced beyond their prepared supply bases. The breakdown of Soviet logistics during the February offensive contributed significantly to their eventual defeat. German tank crews, many of them veterans of campaigns in France and North Africa, demonstrated superior tactical skills throughout the Kharkov battles. The introduction of Tiger I tanks, with their thick armor and powerful 88mm guns, gave German forces a significant technological advantage over Soviet T-34s and KV-1s. However, German numerical inferiority meant that even superior equipment could not guarantee victory in prolonged engagements. Soviet tank crews, while often lacking the experience of their German counterparts, showed remarkable courage and determination. Many T-34 crews fought their tanks until destruction, knowing that retreat often meant execution for cowardice. The Soviet practice of attaching political officers to tank units ensured that crews remained motivated, though it also contributed to tactical inflexibility that German commanders exploited. Weather conditions played a crucial role throughout the Kharkov campaigns, with both sides struggling to adapt to the harsh Ukrainian winter and spring mud seasons. The February offensive began in bitter cold, with temperatures dropping below -30°C. These conditions favored defenders, who could fight from prepared positions while attackers struggled to maintain equipment in the open. The spring thaw of 1943 created additional challenges for both armies. Roads became impassable quagmires that trapped vehicles and made supply difficult. Tank operations became nearly impossible in many areas, forcing commanders to rely on infantry and artillery. These conditions contributed to the temporary stalemate that preceded the final German recapture of Kharkov in March. Medical services on both sides struggled to cope with the enormous casualties generated by the Kharkov battles. Soviet medical units, often lacking proper equipment and supplies, performed heroic work under impossible conditions. German medical services, though better equipped, were overwhelmed by the scale of casualties during the counteroffensive. Many wounded soldiers on both sides died simply because medical help could not reach them in time. The psychological impact of the Kharkov battles extended far beyond the immediate military consequences. For German soldiers, the successful counteroffensive provided a much-needed boost to morale after the disaster at Stalingrad. However, the temporary nature of the victory and the enormous casualties required to achieve it left many questioning whether Germany could continue the war much longer. Soviet soldiers and civilians faced a different psychological challenge. The initial euphoria of the February offensive had given way to bitter disappointment and fear as German forces returned with a vengeance. The civilian population of Kharkov, which had briefly tasted freedom, now faced renewed occupation with the knowledge that liberation might never come. International reactions to the Kharkov battles varied significantly among the Allied powers. British and American observers noted German tactical superiority but recognized that strategic momentum still favored the Soviet Union. German propaganda attempted to portray the victory as evidence that the tide of war was turning, but neutral observers remain skeptical about Germany's long-term prospects. Technological innovations demonstrated during the battles influenced future military development. German improvements in anti-tank weapons and Soviet advances in artillery coordination would prove crucial in later engagements. Today, memorials throughout Kharkiv commemorate the sacrifices made during those terrible years. The Battle of Kharkov ultimately demonstrated that while tactical victories could still be achieved, the strategic balance had shifted irreversibly in favor of the Soviet Union.